the forest was trying to kill her. Eowyn stumbled through the undergrowth, branches clawing at her torn dress like skeletal fingers. Blood trickled from a gash above her eyebrow, mixing with the rain that had been falling since midnight. 3 days. 3 days of running without food, without rest, without hope. But she couldn't stop. If she stopped, they would find her. Her bare feet, she'd lost her shoes crossing the river 2 nights ago, caught on a root, and she pitched forward, barely catching herself on a moss-covered trunk. The impact sent fire through her ribs, the ones Varen had cracked with his boot before she'd fled. "You belong to the Ashford pack," his voice echoed in her memory. "Your gift belongs to us. Try to run, and I'll break more than your ribs." She'd run anyway. The trees began to thin, and Eowyn's chest seized. Ahead, through the curtain of rain, torches blazed in the darkness, hundreds of them, forming a massive circle around what looked like an ancient stone amphitheater carved into the hillside. Figures moved between the flames, wolves in human skin. She could sense it. More wolves than she'd ever seen, gathered in one place. No. 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 She'd wandered into pack territory. Not just any pack territory, she realized with growing horror as she spotted the banners snapping in the wind. A silver wolf against a black field. The sigil of Valdris. The Alpha King's domain. Every pup in every pack grew up hearing stories of Theron Valdris. The king who had united the fractured wolf clans through blood and conquest. The Alpha whose wolf was said to be twice the size of any other. Whose eyes could see into a wolf's very soul. Cruel, they whispered. Merciless. He'd torn out the throat of his own father to claim the throne. Eowyn should have turned back, should have taken her chances with the Ashfords, but her legs buckled beneath her, and suddenly she was sliding down the muddy slope toward the amphitheater. Unable to stop her descent, she crashed through the tree line and into the torchlight. The gathering fell silent. Hundreds of wolves turned to stare at the creature that had tumbled into their sacred space, a half-drowned, bloodied girl in a shredded dress, crawling on hands and knees through the mud. Eowyn tried to stand, tried to flee, but her body had finally surrendered to 3 days of abuse. She collapsed face first into the earth at the base of the stone steps. Somewhere above her, she heard movement, heavy footsteps descending toward her. The crowd parted with whispers that sounded like wind through dead leaves. Then hands were on her large, warm, impossibly gentle as they turned her onto her back. Eowyn's eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring up at a face carved from shadow and firelight. He was younger than she'd expected, late 20s perhaps, with sharp features and a jaw that could have been cut from granite. Rain plastered dark hair to his forehead, and his eyes gods. His eyes were the color of molten amber, burning with an intensity that stole what little breath she had left. The Alpha King himself knelt in the mud beside her, heedless of his fine clothes, holding her broken body as if she were something precious. His gaze moved slowly over her face, cataloging every wound. The split lip, the bruise blooming across her cheekbone, the finger marks around her throat. His expression didn't change, but a dangerous awareness stirred in those golden depths, ancient and predatory, rising to the surface. Then his hands found the hem of her torn sleeve, and he pushed the fabric aside to reveal her arm. The sound that emerged from his chest wasn't human. It was a growl so deep it seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. The wolves in the amphitheater flinched back as their king's power flooded the air, thick and suffocating. Eowyn watched his lips peel back from teeth that were suddenly too sharp, too long. Her arm was a canvas of brutality. Bruises in varying shades of purple and green, some fresh, others weeks old. Burn marks in perfect circles, cigarettes, she knew, though she'd never speak of how she'd received them. And beneath it all, the raised white scars of wounds that had healed wrong because no one had bothered to set them properly. Name them. 2 words, barely more than a rasp, but they carried the weight of absolute authority, of a predator who had already decided that blood would be spilled. Eowyn's cracked lips parted. She wanted to answer, wanted to give him the names that haunted her nightmares. Varen, Corvinus, the whole rotten Ashford bloodline. But darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision, and her body had nothing left to give. Please, she whispered, though she didn't know what she was asking for. Safety, death, an end to the running. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was the Alpha King gathering her into his arms, rising to his full height with her, cradled against his chest, like she weighed nothing at all. Clear the path, she heard him command, his voice like rolling thunder. And send word to the healers. If she dies, I will hold every one of them personally responsible. Then the darkness swallowed her whole, and Elowyn finally stopped running. Warmth. That was the first thing Elowyn registered. Not the biting cold of the forest floor or the damp chill of river crossings, but genuine, blessed warmth soaking into her aching bones. She opened her eyes slowly, wincing at the soft light filtering through gauze curtains. The ceiling above her was vaulted, painted with scenes of wolves running beneath a silver moon. She lay in a bed larger than the entire room she'd shared with 3 other servants back in Ashford, territory sheets softer than anything she'd ever touched, pillows that cradled her head like clouds. I'm dead, she thought. This must be what death feels like. You're not dead. Elowyn's pulse lurched. She turned her head sharply, too sharply, pain lancing through her neck, and found him sitting in a chair beside the bed. The Alpha King. In the daylight, streaming through the windows, he was somehow more intimidating than he'd been in the rain-soaked darkness. Tall even while seated, broad-shouldered beneath a simple black shirt, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the mattress. Though you certainly tried your best to die, he continued, his voice a low rumble. 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, infected lacerations, and more bruises than I could count. The healers are calling it a miracle you're still breathing. Elowyn tried to sit up, to create distance between herself and this wolf king, but her arms gave out beneath her. Before she could collapse back onto the pillows, warm hands caught her shoulders, easing her down with surprising care. Don't, he said. You'll tear your stitches. Where am I? The words scraped past her raw throat. My personal chambers. Personal chambers. The Alpha King's personal chambers. Elowyn's pulse thundered so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Why? Because you collapsed at my feet during a sacred gathering, and I wanted answers. His gaze swept over her face, lingering on the bruise across her cheekbone. You've been unconscious for 2 days. I've been waiting. 2 days. The Ashfords would know by now, would be hunting. I have to go. Panic clawed up her spine. I can't be here. If they find me, no one will find you. You don't understand. She struggled against his gentle hold. They'll come. Varen will come. And when he does, Varen. The name fell from his lips like a curse. That's one of the names I asked for? Elowyn went still. The memory of his growl, the demand in his voice, crashed over her. Name them. Yes, she whispered. Give me the rest. It wasn't a request. Even delivered in that quiet voice, it was a command that brooked no refusal. But Elowyn had spent 3 years learning what happened to those who revealed Ashford's secrets. I can't. Curiosity flickered across his features. Not anger, she knew anger. Knew the way it turned a man's features ugly and cruel. This was different. The first stirrings of patience being tested. You're in my territory now, he said. Under my protection. Whatever hold they had over you means nothing here. Protection? A bitter laugh escaped her, scraping her throat. I know what alphas offer. I know the cost of protection. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, the Alpha King released her shoulders and sat back in his chair. Tell me your name. Elowyn. Elowyn. He repeated it carefully, and the way his voice wrapped around the syllables made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. I am Theron, not the Alpha King, not, Your Majesty. Theron. And whatever you think you know about alphas, I am asking you to give me a chance to prove you wrong. She stared at him, searching for the trap, the manipulation. The Ashfords had been charming too, in the beginning. Corvinus had smiled warmly when he'd purchased her from her starving village. Varen had brought her flowers the first week, before the beatings started. But Theron's eyes held no cruelty. Only a fierce, burning patience that she didn't understand. Why do you care? She asked. I'm no one. A servant. Not even a proper wolf. I've never shifted, never. She stopped herself, horrified. Too much. She'd revealed too much. Theron leaned forward slightly. Never shifted? Elowyn pressed her lips together, refusing to answer. You're wolf-blooded, he said slowly. I can smell it on you. But you've never transformed. His brow furrowed. How old are you? 22 winters. The furrow deepened. Every wolf-blooded child experienced their first shift by 16 at the latest. To reach 22 without transforming was more than unusual, it was supposedly impossible. What did they do to you? He asked. And this time his voice had gone very soft. A knock at the door saved her from answering. A woman entered middle-aged, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid. Forgive the interruption, my king. She dipped her head respectfully. But there's a messenger at the gates. From the Ashford pack. Her gaze flickered to Elowyn. They're demanding the return of their property. The temperature in the room plummeted. Elowyn watched Theron's expression transform from curious concern to cold fury. His features didn't change exactly, but his eyes went hard as winter ice. And when he smiled, it showed too many teeth. Property, he repeated softly. That's the word they used, my king. Theron rose from his chair, in a single fluid motion, his height casting a shadow over the bed. When he looked down at Elowyn, his expression had gentled slightly, but only slightly. Stay here, he said. Rest. We're not finished talking. Then he strode toward the door, and Elowyn saw his hands shifting at his sides, fingernails lengthening into claws, knuckles cracking as the wolf beneath his skin fought for release. My king? The silver-haired woman called after him. What message should I send to the gates? Theron paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the light. Tell them I'm delivering it personally. Elowyn knew she should stay in bed as Theron commanded. But she'd spent 3 years obeying commands, and a spark deep in her chest, one that Theron had never quite managed to extinguish, refused to lie still while her fate was decided without her. Moving hurt. Every breath sent fire through her ribs, and her fractured wrist screamed when she used it to push herself upright. But pain was familiar. Pain was an old companion she knew how to survive. The silver-haired woman had left in a hurry after Theron, leaving the chamber door slightly ajar. Elowyn swung her legs over the edge of the bed. They'd dressed her in a soft sleeping gown, she realized, and the thought of strange hands on her unconscious body made her shudder and forced herself to stand. The floor tilted dangerously. She grabbed the bedpost, breathed through the dizziness, and began to walk. The corridor outside was empty, but she could hear voices echoing from somewhere below. Raised voices. One of them she recognized, that low, commanding rumble that belonged to Theron. The other made her blood freeze in her veins. Theron. Elowyn's legs nearly gave out. She braced herself against the stone wall, pulse racing, as fragments of the argument drifted up to her. Belonged to the Ashford pack by right of purchase. My father paid good silver for that girl. And I should care about your father's silver. Why, exactly? This is a violation of pack law. She's bonded property. My betrothed. Betrothed. The word hit Elowyn like a physical blow. The engagement had been Corvinus's idea, a way to ensure she could never legally escape. Once mated, she would be bound to Theron until death. Their death, or hers. I don't see a mating mark on her neck. Theron's voice had dropped lower, dangerous. I don't smell your claim on her skin. All I see is a half-dead girl covered in wounds that someone spent a long time inflicting. How we discipline our property is not your concern. Everything in my territory is my concern. Elowyn crept closer to the stairwell, peering down into the great hall below. Theron stood at the center, his back to her, tension visible in every line of his powerful frame. Before him stood Theron Ashford, golden-haired, handsome in a sharp-edged way, his pretty face twisted with barely concealed rage. Flanking Theron were 2 Ashford wolves, their expressions nervous. They knew, as Theron clearly didn't, that they stood in the throne room of the most powerful alpha in the realm. My father will not accept this insult, Theron said, stepping forward. Give me the girl, and we can forget this unpleasantness. And if I refuse, then there will be consequences. The Ashford pack has allies, resources. You have nothing. Theron's voice cracked through the hall like a whip. Your pack is a minor territory in the eastern foothills. Your father's allies are frightened merchants who pay you tribute because you've threatened their families. I've crushed larger packs than yours before breakfast, and forgotten their names by lunch. He took a step forward, and even from her hidden vantage point, Elowyn could see Theron flinch. Here is what's going to happen, Theron continued, each word deliberate. You're going to leave my territory. You're going to tell your father that the girl is no longer Ashford property. She is under my protection now, and any attempt to reclaim her will be considered an act of war against the crown of Valdris. He smiled, that cold, wolfish smile that showed too many teeth. Do you understand? Varen's face had gone crimson with humiliation. His hands shook at his sides from fear or fury. Elowen couldn't tell. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "You don't know what she is, what she can do. She's leaving. Now." The command rolled through the hall with supernatural force. Elowen felt it even from the stairwell, the sheer weight of an Alpha King's authority pressing down like a physical thing. Varen staggered, his companions whimpering as their wolves submitted instinctively, but as the Ashford wolves turned to flee, Varen's eyes lifted and found Elowen watching from the shadows above. The smile that crossed his face made her stomach heave. "This isn't over," he called, loud enough for Theron to hear but with his gaze locked on Elowen. "She's ours. One way or another, we'll get her back, and when we do." He drew a finger across his throat in a slow, deliberate motion, then he was gone, the great doors slamming behind him. Theron stood motionless for a long moment, his breathing harsh in the sudden silence. When he finally turned toward the stairs, he found Elowen immediately. "I told you to stay in bed." "I know." She descended the remaining steps slowly, clutching the railing. "I've never been good at following orders." Surprise crossed his face, perhaps at her defiance. Or maybe it was warmth. "You're going to tear your stitches." "I needed to see." "See what?" "Whether you'd hand me over." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Theron crossed to the base of the stairs, stopping just below her so their eyes were nearly level. "I don't hand people over to those who would hurt them," he said quietly. "Whoever you were in Ashford territory, whatever they made you believe about yourself, that ends here. Do you understand?" Elowen's vision blurred with unexpected tears. No one had ever defended her. Not her family, who'd sold her. Not the servants she'd worked beside. Not a single soul in 3 years of torment. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Theron reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, achingly gentle. "When you collapsed at my feet," he said, covered in blood and barely breathing, "my wolf recognized you." Elowen's breath caught. "Recognized me?" "As someone worth protecting." His eyes held hers, burning with quiet intensity. "As someone who matters." A strange warmth bloomed in her chest, spreading through limbs that had been cold for 3 years. She swayed on the step, overwhelmed, and Theron's hands were suddenly at her waist, steadying her. The moment their skin touched, a jolt passed through them both. Heat flooded through Elowen's body, not painful, but overwhelming. Every nerve ending came alive, hypersensitive to the press of his fingers through the thin fabric of her gown. Her fractured wrist suddenly stopped aching. The fire in her ribs cooled to nothing, and her eyes, she saw them reflected in Theron's suddenly widened gaze, flickered from brown to brilliant gold. "What?" Theron's voice came out strangled. "What was that?" Elowen yanked away from him, stumbling backward up the stairs. Her pulse pounded with terror as she stared at her hands, at the faint glow fading from her fingertips. "No, no, no, no. I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean. I can't control it. Please don't." "Elowen." Theron followed her slowly, hands raised in a calming gesture. "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you." "You don't understand." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "That's why they wanted me. That's why Varen, why the beatings." She was babbling now, 3 years of secrets pouring out against her will. "They discovered what I could do. They used me, made me heal them after their battles, absorb their wounds. And every time I did, I felt everything. Every cut, every broken bone. They'd hurt me to punish me, and then they'd make me heal them, and I'd feel their pain and my own. And..." She collapsed onto the stairs, sobbing, the words finally running out. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Theron was there, sitting beside her on the cold stone steps, not touching but present, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "A pain taker," he said softly. "I've heard stories. I thought your kind was extinct." Elowen hugged her knees to her chest. "I wish I was." "Don't." His voice was fierce. "Don't ever say that." She looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. He was watching her, not with disgust or avarice, not with the hungry calculation she'd seen in Corvinus's face when he'd first discovered her gift, but with what looked devastatingly like compassion. "When you touched me," he said slowly, "my shoulder, the old wound that's ached for 10 years, it stopped hurting." Elowen's stomach dropped. I didn't mean to. It just happens sometimes. And your wrist. He nodded toward her arm. It was fractured this morning. Now you're moving it freely. She looked down, realizing with a start that he was right. Her wrist no longer throbbed. The bone had been healed? But she hadn't taken anyone's pain. She hadn't felt the transfer at all. I don't understand, she whispered. Theron's gaze burned into hers. Neither do I. But I intend to find out. He rose, offering her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Elowen took it, and felt that strange warmth flicker between them again, gentler this time. Can you walk? He asked. I think so. Good. His jaw tightened with determination. Because there's someone you need to meet. Someone who might be able to explain what's happening to you. Who? Theron's expression was unreadable as he led her toward a corridor she hadn't noticed before, one that descended deep into the mountain. My grandmother, he said. The last wolf alive, who remembers the old magic. And far below, in the darkness beneath the castle, ancient eyes opened as if awakened by a call they'd been waiting centuries to hear. The passage beneath the castle wound deeper than Elowen had imagined possible, carved through living rock that glittered with veins of silver ore. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose. How old is this place? Elowen asked, her voice echoing off the ancient stone. Older than the castle above. Theron walked close beside her, his presence both intimidating and strangely comforting. Older than recorded history, according to my grandmother. The first wolves built these tunnels when our kind still lived in hiding. The passage opened into a vast cavern, and Elowen stopped breathing. The space was enormous. A natural cathedral carved by water and time. Crystals embedded in the ceiling caught the torchlight and scattered it like stars. At the center of the cavern sat a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. And beside it, in a chair that seemed grown from the stone itself, sat the oldest woman Elowen had ever seen. Her hair was pure white, flowing past her shoulders like a river of moonlight. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each line telling a story Elowen couldn't read. But her eyes, when they opened and fixed on Elowen, were sharp as broken glass, and the same amber gold as Theron's. Grandmother. Theron inclined his head respectfully. I've brought someone who needs your wisdom. The ancient wolf studied Elowen for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then she smiled, revealing teeth that were still surprisingly sharp. A pain taker. Her voice was like wind through dry leaves. I wondered if I would live long enough to see another. Elowen glanced at Theron. You told her? I didn't need to tell her anything. He gestured toward his grandmother. Seraphine has gifts of her own. The sight, Seraphine confirmed, tapping one gnarled finger against her temple. I saw you coming, child, 3 moons ago, in a vision of fire and blood, a girl who carries the wounds of others, collapsing at the feet of the Wolf King. Her unsettling gaze shifted to Theron, though the vision showed more than collapsing. Eventually, a flush crept up Theron's neck. Grandmother. What? The old wolf's smile turned mischievous. I'm ancient, not blind. The bond is already forming between you. Can you not feel it? Elowen's pulse quickened. Bond? What bond? Seraphine beckoned her closer with a crooked finger. Come, child. Sit. Let me see what the Ashfords tried so hard to suppress. Elowen approached the pool slowly, lowering herself onto a smooth stone beside Seraphine's chair. The old wolf's hand, surprisingly warm despite its papery skin, closed around her wrist. They beat you to keep you weak, Seraphine murmured, her eyes going distant. Fed you barely enough to survive. They knew, you see, they knew that if you ever reached your full strength, you could do more than take pain. Her grip tightened. You could give it back. Give it back? Elowen shook her head. I don't understand. Pain takers are healers. Yes. But the old texts speak of another ability, one that emerges only when the gift-bearer finds their true mate. Seraphine's gaze focused sharply on Elowen's face. You can absorb suffering, but you can also release it. Every wound you've ever taken, every moment of agony you've endured, it's stored inside you, child. Waiting. The words hit Elowen like a physical blow. Every beating, every burn, every cracked rib and blackened eye, and shattered hope. It was all still there, coiled inside her like a sleeping serpent. The Ashfords knew, Theron said, his voice rough. That's why they wanted to keep her. to use her as a weapon she can only fully become with a mate bond to anchor her power. Seraphine released Elowen's wrist and turned to her grandson. Which brings us to the problem at hand. The bond between you has already begun. Your wolf recognized her the moment she collapsed at your feet. Hers is calling to you even now, though it's been caged so long she doesn't know how to hear it. Elowen's chest tightened. What happens if the bond isn't completed? Seraphine's expression softened with pity. It will tear you both apart. Incomplete mate bonds are poison, child. The longing grows until it becomes madness. Your wolf will rage against its cage until it destroys you from within. Then we complete it, Theron said immediately. Whatever it takes. It's not that simple, Seraphine shook her head. A mate bond requires both parties to accept it willingly. And this girl has spent 3 years learning that wolves bring only pain. Her heart is armored against the very thing that could save her. The cavern fell silent, except for the soft drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Elowen stared at her hands, mind reeling. A mate bond. With the Alpha King. The very concept should have terrified her. Another chain, another master, another wolf with power over her body and soul. But when she looked at Theron, at the concern in his eyes, the careful distance he maintained even now, the way he'd defended her without expecting anything in return, she felt an unfamiliar emotion rising through the fear. Hope. I need time, she whispered. To understand, to trust. Then you shall have it. Theron's voice was firm. I won't force anything on you, Elowen. Whatever happens between us will be your choice. Seraphine made a sound that might have been approval. The wolf learns patience. Perhaps there's hope for your bloodline yet. Before Theron could respond, a howl echoed through the tunnels, long and urgent, and laced with alarm. His entire demeanor transformed. One moment, he was the patient man offering her time. The next, he was the Alpha King, power radiating from him in waves that made the torchlight flicker. Stay with my grandmother, he commanded, already moving toward the passage. Do not leave this cavern. What's happening? He paused at the tunnel entrance, and when he looked back, his eyes had begun to shift to molten gold, the wolf rising to the surface. The Ashfords, he growled. They've come for you. Then he was gone, leaving Elowen alone with the ancient seer, and the terrible knowledge that war had followed her into the only sanctuary she'd ever found. The battle raged above them. Elowen could hear its snarls and screams, and the clash of wolves in combat echoing down through the stone. Each sound made her flinch, her body conditioned by years of violence to expect pain. He's strong, Seraphine said calmly, as if discussing the weather. The strongest alpha in 3 generations. The Ashfords are fools to challenge him on his own ground, but there are so many of them. Elowen had seen the Ashford pack. Hundreds of wolves, all loyal to Corvinus's brutal rule. Numbers mean nothing against true power. Seraphine's eyes had gone distant, watching events Elowen couldn't see. Theron has already torn through their front lines. Varen is fleeing. Corvinus himself has entered the fight. The old wolf's expression flickered. Ah, what? Elowen grabbed Seraphine's arm. What do you see? Poison, Seraphine whispered. The Ashfords coat their claws in wolfsbane extract. One scratch won't kill an ordinary wolf, but enough of them. Her gaze focused on Elowen with terrible clarity. He's taking too many wounds, fighting too recklessly. He's trying to end it quickly so they can't reach you. A crack formed in Elowen's chest, spreading outward like fractures in thin ice. She was on her feet before she realized she'd moved, racing toward the tunnel passage. Child, wait. But Elowen was already running, following the sounds of battle upward through the winding stone corridors. Her healed body moved freely now. All traces of her injuries erased by whatever strange magic had passed between her and Theron. She burst from the castle's lower entrance into chaos. The courtyard had become a battlefield. Wolves in various stages of transformation clashed under the pale moonlight, blood darkening the cobblestones. And at the center of the carnage stood Theron, no longer human, but a massive black wolf with eyes like molten fire. He was magnificent, terrifying, and he was wounded. Elowen could see the slashes across his flank, the bite marks on his shoulder, the way he favored his left foreleg. Green-tinged foam flecked the edges of his wounds, the wolfsbane doing its work. A gray wolf lunged at Theron's throat. The Alpha King caught it mid-leap, jaws closing around its neck with a sickening crunch. but the effort cost him. He staggered, his great body swaying. Theron. The scream tore from Eowyn's throat without thought. Every wolf in the courtyard turned toward her, including the massive golden wolf that could only be Corvinus Ashford. Time seemed to slow, as the Ashford Alpha changed direction, abandoning his attack on Theron, to charge toward Eowyn instead. His eyes gleamed with vicious triumph. If he couldn't have her, he would destroy her. Eowyn stood frozen, watching death approach on four legs. Then a black blur intercepted the golden wolf, and Theron's jaws locked around Corvinus's throat. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of fur and fangs. Corvinus was larger, but Theron was faster, more savage. He tore into the Ashford Alpha with a fury that spoke of more than battle. This was vengeance for every bruise on Eowyn's skin, every scar on her body, every tear she'd been forced to shed. When it was over, Corvinus lay still on the blood-soaked stones. The remaining Ashford wolves fled into the night, their pack broken. Theron stood over his fallen enemy, chest heaving, and then his legs buckled. Eowyn ran to him, sliding to her knees beside his massive wolf form. Up close, the wounds were even worse than she'd feared. The wolf's bane had spread through his system, blackening the veins around each injury. "No," she breathed, pressing her hands to the largest wound on his flank. "No, no, no. You can't die. You can't." The power rose unbidden, that strange warmth flooding from her chest into her palms. But this time, she didn't try to suppress it. She pushed it outward, into Theron's broken body, willing the poison to flow into her instead. Agony exploded through her veins. She screamed as 3 years of stored pain combined with fresh wolfsbane poison. Every beating, every burn, every moment of suffering she'd absorbed, ignited inside her at once. Her vision went white. Her bones felt like they were splintering. She was dying. She was certain of it. The pain too vast for anybody to contain. But she didn't let go, because beneath her hands, she felt Theron's wounds closing. Felt the poison retreating from his blood. Felt his heartbeat strengthen from a fading flutter to a steady drum. "Live," she commanded silently. "You have to live." The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was a wolf's howl, anguished and desperate and somehow calling her name. Eowyn drifted in a sea of pain. Sometimes, she was aware of voices Theron's, rough with worry. Seraphine's, chanting in an ancient tongue. Others she didn't recognize, debating whether she would survive. Sometimes she felt hands on her body, cool cloths on her forehead, warm bitter liquid forced between her lips. But mostly there was just the darkness, and the endless burning. On the third night though, she wouldn't know it was the third night until later, a presence pierced through the fog, warmth against her skin. And then, at the place where her neck met her shoulder, a sharp pressure that somehow cut through the agony. "Mine," a voice growled through her fever dreams. "You will not leave me. I claim you." The bite was fire and ice at once. Pain that somehow soothed, burning that somehow healed. Eowyn felt a shift deep inside her, a door opening, a lock clicking into place. Her wolf, dormant for 22 years, stirred in recognition. "Mate," it whispered. "Ours." Then the presence was gone, and Eowyn slipped deeper into unconsciousness. When she finally opened her eyes, she was in Theron's chambers again, in that remarkably soft bed, with the painted ceiling. Moonlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of silver, and Theron was there, asleep in the chair beside her. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were wrinkled, as if he hadn't changed them since the battle. Eowyn's hand moved instinctively to her neck, and found a tender spot where his teeth had marked her. He'd claimed her. While she lay dying, he'd given her his mark. She should have been furious, should have felt violated, owned, trapped. But the bond humming through her veins told a different story. This wasn't ownership, it was salvation. He'd anchored her to life when her spirit had been slipping away. Eowyn tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. She must have made a sound, because Theron's eyes snapped open instantly. "Eowyn." Her name fell from his lips like a prayer. He was out of the chair, and kneeling beside the bed in a heartbeat, his hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch. "You're awake. Thank the gods, you're finally awake. How long?" Her voice came out as a croak. 5 days. His eyes glistened. 5 days of watching you burn with fever? Listening to you scream in your sleep, not knowing if you would ever. He stopped, jaw clenching against emotion. You almost died. So did you. That's different. How? He stared at her, as if she'd asked the most incomprehensible question. Because I'm not. You're. He exhaled sharply. You can't do that again. Whatever you did, taking the poison into yourself, you can't. I forbid it. Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the confusion, Elowen felt her lips twitch toward a smile. You forbid it? Yes. And if you're dying? If the only way to save you is, then let me die. His voice cracked on the words. Elowen, I watched you suffer for 5 days, heard you screaming, felt your pain through the bond, and I couldn't do anything. Her hand rose to touch the mark on her neck. You did do something. Shame flickered across his features. I had no right. You were unconscious, unable to consent. But you were slipping away. And I. His voice broke. I couldn't lose you, not when I'd only just found you. You saved me. She caught his hand before he could pull away. The bond. The claim. It kept me anchored when I was drowning. You're not angry? I should be. She pressed his palm to her cheek, feeling the warmth of him, the steady pulse of the bond between them. But I'm not. I'm grateful. Theron's breath shuddered out of him. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. My mate, he whispered. My miracle. The bond has taken hold, Elowen said softly. I can feel it. Feel you, yes. His thumb stroked across her cheekbone. But it's not complete. Not yet. That requires my mark on you. She understood now. The claiming was only half finished. He had given her his bite, but she had not returned it. When I'm strong enough, when you choose to, he pulled back to meet her eyes. If you choose to, the mark I gave you, it was desperation, not expectation. You can still walk away, Elowen. The bond will hurt, but you could survive it. She looked at this wolf king kneeling beside her bed, offering her freedom even after he'd saved her life. Everything she'd learned about alphas told her this was a trap, that kindness was just cruelty in disguise, but her wolf knew better. And for the first time, she was ready to listen. I don't want to walk away, she whispered. I want to stay. The smile that broke across Theron's face was like dawn after endless night. 3 weeks of healing. 3 weeks of learning what it meant to be cherished, instead of owned. Elowen stood on the balcony of their shared chambers, watching the sun set over the mountains of Valdris. Behind her, she could hear Theron speaking with his advisors about trade agreements and border patrols, the mundane business of ruling a kingdom. Our kingdom, she reminded herself, still marveling at the thought. The half-formed bond between them had settled into a warm constant, a golden thread connecting her heart to his. She could feel his emotions now, his contentment as he handled the day's business. The flicker of desire, when his gaze found her across the room, the fierce protectiveness that flared whenever anyone mentioned the Ashfords. But there was a second presence growing stronger each day. Her wolf. It stirred inside her now, pressing against barriers that had held for 22 years. Seraphine had explained that the trauma of her captivity had locked her wolf away, a protective measure that had saved her sanity but stunted her power. Now, with the partial bond feeding her strength, those barriers were crumbling. Soon, the wolf seemed to whisper. Soon, we will run. The advisors filed out, and warm arms encircled her from behind. You're thinking too loudly, Theron murmured against her hair. I can feel it through the bond. I'm thinking about running. Elowen leaned back into his embrace. About what it will feel like when I finally shift? It will feel like freedom. He pressed a kiss to her temple. And I'll be right beside you. A knock interrupted them, sharp, urgent. Theron tensed, his arms tightening around Elowen. Enter. One of his guards stumbled through the door, his face ashen. My king, there's been an attack. The eastern village. The Ashfords? We don't know. The guard's voice shook. But the survivors, they're saying things. Impossible things. Shadows that moved on their own. Wolves frozen mid-stride, unable to move as something carved through them. Elowen's stomach dropped. She'd heard whispers of such magic, dark stories that even the Ashfords spoke of in hushed tones. Blood magic, she breathed. Theron's expression hardened. Summon the War Council. Now. The great hall was packed with wolves when they arrived, all of them radiating tension and fear. Seraphine sat in a chair near the throne, her ancient face grave. The witch's name is Morwen, the old seer said without preamble. I thought she was dead, killed in the purging a century ago. Clearly, I was wrong. What does she want? Theron demanded. The same thing all practitioners of blood magic want. Power. Seraphine's gaze found Elowen. And she's found a way to get it. Varen Ashford offered her an irresistible prize in exchange for her services. Elowen's breath caught. Me. He offered her. Me. A pain-taker's blood is the most potent fuel for dark magic. Seraphine's voice was heavy with sorrow. One drop can power spells that would normally require sacrifice. And you, child, have absorbed enough suffering to fuel 1,000 rituals. The room erupted in shouting wolves demanding action, protection, war. But Elowen heard none of it. Her gaze was fixed on Theron, on the way his hands had clenched into fists. She won't touch you, he growled. I'll tear her apart before she gets within a mile of... His words cut off with a strangled gasp. Elowen watched in horror as Theron's body went rigid, his eyes widening with shock. Black veins began spreading across his skin, crawling up his neck and across his face like living shadows. Theron, she caught him as he fell, lowering him to the stone floor. His body convulsed in her arms, foam flecking his lips. Through their bond, she felt his agony sharp and overwhelming, and utterly alien. What's happening? She screamed. Someone help him! Seraphine was at her side in an instant, her gnarled hands pressing to Theron's chest. When she pulled them back, her fingers were stained with liquid shadow. A curse. The old wolf's voice trembled. A seed of dark magic planted through one of her servants during the battle. It's been dormant, waiting for her command to bloom. Can you remove it? Seraphine's silence was answer enough. There must be something. Tears fell onto Theron's convulsing face. Some way to save him, please. The curse feeds on his life force. Seraphine closed her eyes. By dawn, it will consume him completely. No. No. Elowen clutched Theron's body to her chest, feeling his heartbeat weaken with each passing moment. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything they'd survived. There is one possibility. Seraphine's voice was barely a whisper. But it would require a sacrifice I cannot ask of you. Anything. Elowen didn't hesitate. I'll do anything. The curse can be drawn out, transferred to another host, but only someone bonded to him could survive the process. And even then, the old wolf's hand found Elowen's cheek. The amount of dark magic involved would trigger your transformation. Violently, painfully. Most wolves die in forced shifts. And if I don't try, he dies anyway. Yes. Elowen looked down at Theron's face at the man who had lifted her from the mud and called her extraordinary, who had claimed her when she was dying, who had taught her that love didn't have to mean pain. Tell me what to do. They carried Theron to the cavern beneath the castle. The pool of still water now reflected a moon that hung full and heavy in the sky above, its light filtering down through cracks in the stone. The blood moon, Seraphine murmured. Perhaps the old gods are watching after all. Wolves lined the cavern walls, silent witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Elowen barely noticed them. Her entire world had narrowed to the man lying on the altar stone, his breathing shallow, and his skin more shadow than flesh. Place your hands on his chest, Seraphine instructed, and open yourself to the bond, completely. No barriers, no protection. Elowen's hands trembled as she pressed them to Theron's heart. Even now, she could feel it struggling, the steady drum that had become the center of her universe, growing weaker with each beat. I love you, she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her. I should have said it before. I love you, Theron. Then she opened the bond. The darkness hit her like a physical force, pouring through the connection between them with hungry intent. Elowen screamed as it flooded her body. The stored pain of 3 years, every beating, every burn, every moment of suffering, ignited alongside the curse, and suddenly she was burning from 2 directions at once. But she held on. She held on as her bones began to crack and reform, as her skin split and fur pushed through the wounds, as her spine elongated and her jaw stretched and her fingers curled into claws. Shift, her wolf commanded. Shift and survive. The transformation ripped through her with savage intensity. Elowen felt herself fragmenting, consciousness splitting between human and beast. The pain was beyond anything she'd experienced, worse than the wolf's bane, worse than every beating combined. But beneath the agony, she felt power rising. All the suffering she'd absorbed over 22 years swelled inside her like a tidal wave. And with her wolf finally freed, she understood what Seraphine had meant. She could give it back. Elowen threw back her head, a wolf's head now, covered in fur, the color of fresh snow, and howled. The sound that emerged wasn't just a howl, it was a weapon. Every ounce of pain she'd ever absorbed poured out of her in a wave of golden light. It crashed into the darkness, trying to consume her, shattering it like glass. The curse recoiled, writhing and screaming, in a voice that wasn't human. And then, from the shadows of the cavern, Morwen emerged. The witch was ancient, with skin like cracked parchment and eyes that burned with hellfire. Behind her stood Varen, his golden hair stained with soot, and his handsome face twisted with triumph. Beautiful, Morwen crooned. Even more powerful than I hoped. The curse was just bait, you see. A way to force your shift. To unlock all that delicious potential. Elowen snarled, positioning herself between the witch and Theron's unconscious body. Now. Morwen raised one skeletal hand. Don't make this difficult. Come with me willingly, and I'll let your precious king live. Resist, and I'll make you watch as I— She never finished the sentence. Elowen lunged, faster than she'd known she could move. Her jaws closed around the witch's throat, and she released everything she had left. Every drop of stored agony, every moment of suffering, every scream she'd ever swallowed. Morwen's shriek shattered crystals in the ceiling as she crumbled to dust. Varen tried to run, but the wolves lining the cavern walls moved as one, blocking his escape. He fell to his knees as Elowen padded toward him, her white fur splattered with the witch's remains. Please! His pretty face crumpled with terror. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave. I'll never come back. And You hurt me, Elowen thought, and somehow she knew he could hear her. For 3 years, you made my life a nightmare. She lowered her muzzle until she was inches from his face. But I'm not broken. I never was. Then she turned her back on him. Take him to the dungeons, a voice commanded. The king will decide his fate. But Elowen was already moving back to the altar, shifting mid-stride until she stood beside Theron, in human form. Naked, trembling, covered in sweat and blood but whole. The darkness had completely retreated from Theron's skin. His breathing was strong, his heartbeat steady. And as she watched, his eyes fluttered open. Elowen? His voice was hoarse. What happened? She laughed, a sound that was half sob, and pressed her forehead to his. I saved you, she whispered. I shifted. I destroyed the witch. Her hand found his cheek. I became what I was always meant to be. Theron's arms came around her despite his weakness. Show me your wolf. She shifted again, easier this time. When she stood before him on 4 legs, Theron's expression was one of pure wonder. White as snow, he murmured, reaching out to touch her fur. Beautiful. He shifted too, his black wolf rising to stand beside her white one. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, 2 halves of a whole, nearly united. Then Elowen did what instinct demanded. She moved forward, her muzzle finding the spot where his neck met his shoulder, and bit down, claiming him, completing the bond, making him hers as surely as she was his. Theron's howl of joy echoed through the cavern, joined moments later by every wolf present. The sound swelled and grew, until it seemed to shake the very mountain. When they shifted back to human form, Theron gathered her in his arms and kissed her with a desperation that spoke of almost loss and overwhelming relief. My mate, he said against her lips. My queen, my king, she answered. My home. 1 year later, Elowen stood at the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun rise over the kingdom of Valdris. Below, wolves in both human and beast form were preparing for the day's celebration, the anniversary of the Alpha King's mating. Arms encircled her from behind, and she leaned back into Theron's familiar warmth. You're awake early, he murmured. Someone kept me up late. Complaints? Never. She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. Through their bond, she felt his contentment deep and steady and absolute. I was thinking about the girl I used to be, she admitted. The one who believed wolves only brought pain. And now? Elowen smiled, her hand moving to rest on the slight swell of her belly. a secret she'd been saving for today. Now I know that wolves bring everything, she said. Pain and healing, fear and safety, loneliness and, she guided his hand to cover hers, family. Theron went very still. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, to the subtle curve beneath them. When he looked back up, his expression was one of wonder. I am. The sound he made was barely human, a growl of pure joy. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around as laughter bubbled from both of them. A pup, he breathed. Our pup, our beginning, Elowen corrected. Of many things. She looked out at the kingdom, spread before them, the mountains and forests, and the pack that had become her family. At the ancient seer who had become her mentor, and the wolves who had become her friends, at the mate who had seen her at her most broken and called her extraordinary. I love you, she said. Theron pressed his forehead to hers, and through their bond, she felt his response. Not just words, but emotion so vast it nearly overwhelmed her. And I love you, my queen. My heart. My home. In the end, that was what she'd truly found. Not just a mate or a kingdom, or a power she'd never known she possessed. She'd found home, and she would never run again.